and welcome to this session on a just transition. I think this is another critical moment for us at this COP28, this side event. We gather at this side event, which is crucial to acknowledge a poignant truth, that the very places providing the world with the means to transition to green energy are bearing a heavy price for doing good. They are suffering for doing good. For example, the Democratic Republic of Congo furnishes the world with 70% of its cobalt needs. South Africa supplies over 80% of the world's platinum needs. Zimbabwe, Burkina Faso, and others put together, they supply over 40% of the world's needs in terms of lithium and several other technology minerals. Yet these contributions are met with increased poverty and environmental devastation. This stark injustice underpins our discussion that demands urgent attention. As we delve into the topic of our panel, a just transition for Africa, mining for climate change mitigation, ethical and faith perspectives, we want to confront these issues and challenges head-on and strive for equitable solutions. And this afternoon, we have a very able panel to speak to the topic, starting from presenters who give us a faith perspective, ethical perspectives, and we also have speakers who will speak to the drive that we need, the political drive that we need to ensure that we accomplish this agenda. And of course, we are blessed to have analytical people, academic people who help us to see and judge what is happening so that that will move us to better action and more responsible action. So we'll have Reverend Father Paul Igweta, who is standing for Bishop Charles Kasonde, who couldn't make it for some reason, and he sends his apologies. And we have Honorable Dr. Kwabena Kakofu, who will represent, who represents the Environmental Protection Agency of Ghana, and is also leading the Ghana delegation at this COP28. On the panel, we also have Dr. Antoinette Dako, Tsibo Dako, is it? Tsibo Dako, from the University of Ghana Center for Social Policy. And we were to have Dr. Mwenda from PACJA, the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance. He was also not able to make it, but he has sent a representative from PACJA. Dr. Philip Kilonzo. So without much ado, I'm going to ask Reverend Father Paul from the from AMESIA, the Association of Member Episcopal Conferences of East Africa, who will represent Bishop Charles Kasonde. He will actually read his text on his behalf. So Father Paul, get us going. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charles. Good afternoon to all of you. I stand here on behalf of AMESEA Bishops' Conference, that's in Eastern Africa, reading the speech on behalf of the chairman, whom I work for. Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed delegates, brothers and sisters in our shared stewardship of creation. As the bishops of AMESEA, and particularly as the chair of AMESEA, a region teeming with the raw materials that underpin our collective quest for a sustainable future, I stand before you at this critical juncture of COP28. Our discourse today is not merely about policy or economics. It is a profound dialogue on justice, a justice that harmonizes our dominion over the earth with a pressing mandate of equitable progress amidst the climate emergency. In the early part of our discourse, it is crucial to acknowledge Africa's significant role in addressing the global climate crisis through its rich deposit of technology, minerals. These resources, essentially for renewable energy and technology and digital advancement, place Africa at the forefront of the global transition to a sustainable future. However, as Africa steps forward to make this vital contribution, it is paramount that the continent is not subjected to exploitation and injustice. The extraction of this technology, minerals must be approached with a commitment to ethical practice, ensuring that Africa's generosity in sharing its natural wealth does not come at the cost of its own environmental integrity and the well-being of its people. This is a call then for imbalanced and fair exchange, where Africa's pivotal role in combating climate change is recognized and valued, not exploited. As we harness these critical resources, it must be done in a way that it uplifts the African communities in respect to this environment and contribute to the global fight against climate change, setting an example of how resources wealth can be utilized responsibly and equitably for greater good. The just transition for Africa is a clarion call to prudently and ethically harness our abundant mineral wealth, like the graphite, lithium, and cobalt beneath our feet for the global pivot towards green energy. This treasure, if rightly managed, is not a Pandora box, but cornucopia that should elevate our communities. History, however, provides a sobering lesson against trajectory of exploitation. The specter of colonial extraction, where the earth and its children are utilized and forsaken, must not be the blueprint for our tomorrow. We are then duty-bound to cultivate a fresh legacy, one of fairness, honor, and mutual prosperity. The ethical quandary we encounter in mining for climate change mitigation is profound. It is unconscionable to endorse an energy transition that intensifies the plight of the vulnerable or disgrace the creation which we are entrusted to protect. The extraction of our minerals to fuel a new chapter of humanity must be conducted in a manner that safeguards the dignity of every laborer, honors the sanctity of our environment, and promotes the common welfare. Our journey, therefore, takes us through the cobalt-rich terrain of Democratic Republic of Congo to the burgeoning lithium mines of Zimbabwe, where the burden on both land and people is palpable. The burgeoning demand for these resources, while heralding a shift from fossil dependence, also portends grave risk. Account of human rights violation, perilous labor conditions, and ecological harm are distressing and are too prevalent. As stewards of faith and global system, then, we are impelled to address these concerns with valor and integrity. Thus, we advocate for a transition that is genuinely just, a transition that is anchored in ethical standards, international norms, and the principle of solidarity and subsidiarity. We seek transparency in our supply chains, accountability for our corporate entities, and governance that guarantees a fair share of wealth derived from our resources. As we address the ethical mining of minerals, It is imperative to broaden our perspective to include responsible consumption, particularly by the developed nations of the global north. The choices made in these nations are far-reaching implications, extending well beyond their borders. Every product consumed, be it an electronic device or an electric vehicle, carries with it a story of extraction and labor. It is a moral obligation for consumers and policymakers in this country, then, to ensure that their demand for resources does not perpetuate injustice and exploitation in the global south. Ethical consumption must become a cornerstone of global climate policy. This entails stringent regulations and standards to ensure that products entering the market in developed countries are sourced through practice that honor human dignity, protect the environment, and contribute to the prosperity of communities where these resources are extracted. By aligning consumption, then, patterns with ethical and sustainable practices, we can create a more just and equitable global economy, one that is truly reflects our shared responsibility for the planet and for each other. This change in consumption habit comply with the responsible mining and can forge a path towards a truly sustainable and just global society. From a faith perspective, responsible mining transcends mere economic activities. It becomes a moral imperative. Our stewardship of the earth is a sacred duty entrusted to us by the divine. As such, the way we extract and utilize the earth resources is a reflection of our respect for this divine gift. Responsible mining, therefore, is not just about efficiency or profitability. It is about reverence for creation, ethical stewardship, and compassion for our fellow human beings. It compels us to consider the long-term impact of our actions on the environment and on the communities that depend on these resources for their livelihood. This approach aligns with the core principle of many faiths, which call for care for the vulnerable, justice for the oppressed, and protection of the earth. By integrating these spiritual values into our practices, we not only work towards a more sustainable future, but also honor the spiritual connections we share with our planet and each other. In our deliberation today, then, let us maintain our focus on the human element within the mineral narrative. The agrarians, the miners, the families whose destinies are inexorably linked to our choices. The dreams of a more prosperous existence of educational opportunities, of health, and well-being are entrusted to us. They gaze upon us to safeguard their tomorrows, and it is our trust we must honor. I therefore implore the international community, particularly nations with high carbon emissions, to plunge to decisive and audacious measures to support Africa in its fortifying. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Reverend Father Paul Igueta, for that very eloquent presentation of the issues, ethical issues that come to bear on extraction of minerals, pointing out specifically our need to act responsibly, but also our need to ensure that at the center of this is life, human life, as well as the need to care for the earth. And I think that's important in helping us asking the important question, how can we be more reasonable? How can we be more responsible in driving this transition to smart energy so that it doesn't leave impacts that do not only despoil the environment, but also lead to the annihilation of life. Thank you very much. I'm now going to turn to the second speaker. Is going to give us another keynote, the second keynote, and this is no other than Dr. Kwabena Kokofu. As I mentioned, he leads the Ghana's efforts to safeguard its natural beauty and resources, and here at the COP, he's actually the delegation the Ghana delegation leader in the efforts of Ghana at this COP. Welcome, sir, and go ahead and make your presentation. Yeah, you can be heard, but you can't be seen. Yeah. Thank you. Go ahead, sir.
So I need a mic. Thank you very much, Father Charles. Good afternoon, esteemed delegates, distinguished guests, and fellow panelists. Yes, I am Henry, the Executive Director of Environmental Protection Agency, and I also double as the Presidential Special Envoy for Climate Vulnerable Forum. This is about 68 countries across the world, Africa, Caribbean, Latin America, Asia, and elsewhere, representing 1.6 billion people. These are a group of people who are on the front line of this climate crisis and menace. Given that background, I would like to indulge you, colleagues, for me to take the liberty to vary the topic a little bit, and I propose this one: embracing prosperity and shelving vulnerability through mining for climate change mitigation. Faith and ethical-based perspective. I do so because I've already mentioned that I'm the spokesperson for vulnerable countries so far as this climate conversation is concerned. Today, at the crucial side event of COP28 organized by the Jesuit Justice and Ecology Network, Africa and Caritas Africa, we gather under a banner that signifies not just hope, but a mandate for action. A just transition for Africa, mining for climate change mitigation, ethical perspective. In this era of climate vulnerability, Africa stands at the forefront of potential climate prosperity. Our continent's abundant technology minerals are not merely assets in the global fight against climate change, but are catalysts for transformative change. However, this transformation hinges on our collective ethical responsibility and commitment to sustainable practices. The imperative for value addition to our technology minerals is a cornerstone of this transformation agenda. This process is not merely about economic growth. It is about climate prosperity, a model that intertwines economic development with environmental stewardship and social equity. As we harness these minerals essential for renewable technologies, our approach must be rooted in ethical mining practices that prioritize the well-being of our communities and the health of our ecosystems. As the Executive Director of Ghana's Environmental Protection Agency and a voice for climate vulnerable nations, I have seen the impacts of climate change and unsustainable mining practices. Our approach must therefore shift from extraction to empowerment. By adding value to our minerals through local processing, we can spur innovation, create sustainable job opportunities, and build resilient economies that are equipped to face the challenges of climate change. The journey towards climate prosperity requires a multifaceted approach. It demands partnerships that transcend borders, collaborations between African nations, and support from the global community, especially from those who have historically benefited from our resources. It calls for investment in technology transfer, capacity building, and the creation of fair and ethical chains. Climate prosperity also means ensuring that our people are not merely bystanders in the journey. Community engagement, equitable benefit sharing, and safeguarding the rights and livelihoods of those on the front lines of mining operations are fundamental to our mission. Our conversation today is not just about environmental stewardship, but also about ethical imperatives as we delve into the realm of mining for climate change mitigation. We must align our actions with the principles of fairness and justice as outlined in the Paris Agreement. The Global Pact reminds us of our shared responsibility to limit global warming, but it also calls for equity, the principle of fair shares. The concept is crucial, especially for Africa, where the need for development must be balanced with the imperative to protect our planet. Moreover, as children of God, we are entrusted with a sacred duty to protect His creation. This duty is not just a moral obligation, but a divine commandment that guides our stewardship of the earth. And here I would like to remind ourselves of Genesis chapter 1, verse 27 to 31, that when God created man, He gave man dominion over all things, things that were in the air, the birds that flew in the air, the fishes in the ocean, the plants and the herbs on the ground. And He asked man to take dominion and protect them. That was the first assignment God gave to man. God never asked man to become a doctor. God never asked man to become a professor. But He asked man to become the steward of His creation, that is nature. And that is where we are now, and we are being called upon to do so. In the context of mining, this translates to practices that honor the sanctity of our environment and uphold the dignity of our communities. Ethical mining is not an option, but a necessity, ensuring that our pursuit of climate prosperity does not come at the cost of the very creation we are called to protect. And here again, we remind ourselves of Genesis chapter 1, verse 27 to 31. The imperative for value addition to our technology minerals is a cornerstone of this transformation. It is not just about economic growth, it's about climate prosperity, a model that intertwines development with environmental stewardship and social equity. As we harness these minerals essential for renewable technologies, our approach must be rooted in ethical mining practices that prioritize well-being of communities. And as I have made this point already, in conclusion, let us recognize that our path to climate prosperity is paved with responsibility, collaboration, and innovation. As we mine for the minerals that power climate mitigation technologies, let us also mine the immense potential of our people and our continent. Our goal is clear: to transform Africa's mineral wealth into a beacon of hope, sustainability, and prosperity for all. Thank you for your attention, and let us commit to a future where every African nation thrives in the era of climate prosperity. Thank you for your attention again. Bye.
Thank you very much, Dr. Shikoku, for that eloquent presentation. And you have highlighted similar principles, ethical principles, that call us to stewardship, to care for creation. But what is powerful is that you have highlighted the fact that these are also present in other frameworks like the Paris Agreement that need to be followed upon. Yeah, thank you very much. The next speaker is already up at the podium. No other than Dr. Antoinette Tsibo-Dako, an expert in social policy analysis and economic analysis. She will speak to the topic from that perspective, some of the issues that we have to pay attention to. She will help us to see deeper in order for us to really ensure that we engage a transition that is not only just, but also responsible.
Thank you very much. So just by way of a background, We are used to a lot of traditional mining practices that have resulted in habitat destruction, air pollution, water and environmental challenges. And this whole fight to mitigate climate change means that we should go using more green principles. We should emphasize on resource efficiency, minimal environmental destruction, and use more responsible waste management processes even in our mining industry. So ethically and by all faith imperatives, there's a deep growing concern and a global shift where we want to move from the old practices to a new practice, which is more resource protection driven and is looking more at our planet's delicate ecosystems and the well-being, especially of our local communities, so that we do not destroy our environment for our unborn generations. And here I show a picture of some of the very old traditional mining practices, including the new ones that we are busy pursuing and how it has ecologically destroyed our environment. But we are moving, we are shifting to a greener Ghana, where a greener world, a greener Africa, where we want to do more about restoring our ecosystem. But today we look at a world where we want to mine tech minerals that is supposed to drive us to a greener and a cleaner environment. And these minerals stems from the fact that technology is gradually and speedily improving. Things are going high. Everybody needs these tech minerals. So you see cobalt, lithium, and all these rare earth minerals that are very, very instrumental in the construction of these new technology, earth systems and energy storage devices are the ones that are gradually achieving and getting more attention. And the new market trend shows that there's actually a consistently increasing demand for these minerals because we need them to power electric vehicles, wind turbines, solar panels, and all of these things. This is the clean energy, and this is where we have all arrived at. So if you look at the International Energy Agency's Critical Minerals Market Review, it reports that from 2017 to 2022, the main factor behind the tripling in the overall demand of lithium moved 70% up. There was also a jump in the demand for cobalt, 40% rise in the demand for nickel. This shows us that mining is not going to go down. In fact, this demand for the new tech minerals shows us that we need to even look for more sustainable ways. Because as we move to greener energy and do away with coal, oil, and the unclean types of mineral resources that we were formerly mining, we would still have to look for more sustainable mining practices. And the review report shows that already in 2022, energy transition minerals investment there had reached as high as $322 billion. Investment is gradually climbing, 20% in 2021, and even a further 30% in 2022. Lithium especially saw the sharpest increase in investment, a jump of 50%, and this was followed by copper and nickel. So we have to move towards a step for solid policy recommendations in our mining sector that don't just speak to the traditional mining practices, but speak to these new tech minerals, because it is going to be, the demand there is going to increase, investment there is going to increase, and we will have to find ways of ensuring that we don't continue destroying our delicate ecosystem. So what does research say? What are we saying here today? We are saying that the first and most important policy recommendation that we want to see in deep faith and with a lot of ethics is the fact that we should ensure a more harmonized development of inclusive policies with deep ethical standards propagated through a core belief system. We have a lot of deep core belief systems in all our traditional societies, but we tend to ignore them and make policies that don't include these core belief systems. So we have belief systems that believe that the environment belongs to the natural deities, belong to the natural gods. We need to make policies that actually include some of these faith systems. The core belief systems that exist in our traditional societies need to be incorporated more. This means that you would have to engage more effectively. The people living in resource-endowed regions need to understand their cultural values, their perspectives, and how they have traditionally protected their environment. You would also have to educate and sensitize these communities and resource-endowed regions on how best they protect their natural habitat. They have existing principles and existing ways of doing that. We have to be more inclusive as we educate and sensitize them. You learn from them, you pick what they are doing, and then you incorporate it in policy. And then we should also push for higher local content and community involvement in the protection of our environment. We are so used to foreign direct investment in a lot of our mining sector. And as a result, low local investment means that protection of our natural habitat consistently remains low. We have to fight to push for higher local content percentages in our mining sector to ensure that our local habitat has more contribution, our local communities have more contribution to how their environment is protected. Okay, secondly, we need to create and maintain regulatory practices that can be adhered to by all. This, I say, we should practice an ethical belief called universalism as opposed to particularism. In universalism, you recognize everybody as being equal. You treat everybody as being very important. So some people are not regarded as more important than others. Research has shown that the discretionary implementation of a lot of our mining regulations is what creates the gap. So where you would punish people for practicing a certain way or mining in a certain way, you do not punish other people. This discriminatory way of implementing our regulations does not augur well. So ethically, it is important that we practice a more universal approach in how we implement our policies. We should also encourage more responsible investment. We should be bold to say that this investment is not going to be eco-friendly. This technology that you are bringing to come and mine our mineral is not eco-friendly, and therefore we will turn it away. And then we should emphasize on the deployment of technologies that curtail harmful chemical use, further efficient resource utilization, and aid the restoration of our mining communities. We need to encourage more research in the mining of these tech minerals. The truth is, there's a lot of information available, but there's also a lot of misinformation available. And it is important that we therefore invest in research. Research that explores social accountability and community involvement in tech mineral mining. This is because we need to understand how mining firms want to connect with local communities. We need to study indigenous rights and understand what sustainable growth processes that we would encourage people to take on. Comprehensive studies on the ecological impacts of tech mineral mining is also very important. We are going straight into tech mineral mining and assuming that the old traditional mining practices will be at par with this tech mining. It is not true. There's a lot of studies that show that lithium mining, for instance, has huge environmental impacts, not just on the destruction of soil, but even the air pollution, the kind of lithium, the kind of chemical waste that is produced as a result of lithium mining. We have to have studies on it, more research into it, and design proper policies and practices that would ensure better water vitality and prevent air pollution. Of course, we keep preaching about reduce the carbon footprint of mining operations. How are we going to do that? It's a policy recommendation that is across all the literature. What we suggest is, if you want to ensure that you're reducing carbon footprint of mining operations, then you need to, again, resort to a more ethical and inclusive approach. In a lot of African countries, we have vast amounts of forest lands. We still have vast amounts of green, but we do not have the technology and the technique to measure how much of this we are contributing to carbon reduction. We need to find how we can trade our green for carbon reduction and understand how we embrace more policies that would reduce the carbon footprint in our countries. We also need to enforce adherence to reclamation. We need to ensure that when we make contracts and agreements, we ensure that there is reclamation and restoration of our ecosystems. Companies must be made responsible for returning the land to the state, or as close as possible as it is to its natural condition. It might not go back to the original state, but as close as possible. This involves replanting, revegetation, creating wildlife habitat, and even trying to restore or remedy the water quality. And here I give a very good example of what has happened in Ghana. We have managed to reclaim over 1,200 hectares of land that had been lost as a result of mining. And this is arable land which is being revegetated. So it is definitely possible. Thank you very much to JENA, to University of Ghana, to my Center for Social Policy Studies, and to Caritas that have supported me to carry out this research.
Thank you very much, Dr. Antoinette, for that analysis and throwing more light around the things that we need to pay attention to, the statistics. Just to remind the room once again, we are becoming more and more aware that, as the doctor has mentioned, the extraction of technology minerals is growing, will continue to grow, it will quadruple, it will 5 times increase. But the question to ask is, are we caring enough about the destruction it is leaving? Are there better ways we can use to transition to smart energy without leaving the impacts that the speakers have highlighted? That's what we are concerned about in this conversation this afternoon. We're now going to go to PACJA, the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance. It is a consortium of over 1,000 NGOs, foundations, centers of analysis that are concerned about the issues we are talking about, the climate issues. And these organizations are found in 51 countries, if I'm not mistaken, out of the 54, 55 countries of Africa. So we have Dr. Kilonzo, the policy analyst for PACJA, to make a presentation from the perspective of some of the low-lying issues we need to pay attention to, caring about communities, about countries, about people who suffer from the ground.
Thank you so much, moderator, for this particular opportunity. I'm making this presentation on behalf of Dr. Mithika Mwenda, who is the Executive Director of the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance. But when this opportunity came, I had a moment to reflect. I remember convening some members of a legislative unit in a discussion, and it was on the African Mining Vision, and they took me back and they told me, we thought we came here for you to tell us how to mine coal, but now the narrative has changed after the 3rd day. So I think it's important to keep some certain perspectives. And then I also recalled when my country was actually trying to domesticate the African mining vision, I was punished to write a chapter on social and environmental safeguards across one night because it was missing within that particular vision. And that explains the dilemma. I think right at the onset, we need to be clear that there is no mining that is carbon neutral. So if you are looking at mining that is carbon neutral from a climate perspective, it doesn't exist. But it's important to build a context to this particular conversation and begin to know where did we miss the boat. The African mining vision was actually a broad and overarching framework for securing transparent, equitable, and optimal exploitation of mineral resources, again, to secure broad-based sustainable growth and socio-economic development. That framework, I think right now as we speak, is close to 10 years old. It is yet to see the light of the day in terms of implementation. So the challenge around domesticating that particular vision, implementing that vision, yes, it could have a bit of challenges here and there, then begins to explain where the gaps and where the rain started to beat us. And it's important we take that into context. Again, when you look at the map of Africa, you will find that there is almost like a perfect pattern where we have minerals. Pockets where we have minerals are also pockets of passive property, which again raises questions of responsibilities and ethics. And when you go to the African mining vision and introspect it, then you realize the gap is fundamentally in terms of governance, implementing policy framework that actually secures posterity for all. I know under the transitional minerals, you hear a different conversation as if transitional minerals are not minerals per se, yet ideally they ought to be governed under the same framework. The laxity by African countries to domesticate and to implement the African mining vision then becomes a conspiracy. Why do we have such conspiracy when we have such a progressive framework? Indeed, the African Union set the African Mining Center, and the role of the African Mining Center was again to support African countries in implementation of the same. The progress made within the implementation, again, is neither here nor there. Yet what we are seeing actually are irreversible damages to environment ecosystems. And these irreversible damages are actually creating what you can actually describe injustices into the ecosystem. And if you walk across Africa, you will find those injustices littering the continent, whether it's water that is soiled with acid mines, drainage in South Africa, whether it's air that is unbreathable across the Mpumalanga province. They are all over, and you basically see them, and you struggle with them. If you go to Kenya, you'll still find a case of, again, rivers that are increasingly getting soiled with mercury as a result of mining practices. So these are elements of injustices that we must reckon with, even as we speak within our own context. And when we go to the transition of mineral, the story does not necessarily change. Probably it becomes worse. Of course, building on the gap that is still there in terms of implementation of an overarching framework on African mining. But what we see is a serious scramble for Africa in terms of transitional mineral. That scramble in itself plays in a context that weakens governance in a majority of African countries. And indeed, as we speak, we are seeing countries with fair amount of deposits on transitional minerals being actually at the brink of climate-motivated insecurities. When you look at the Niger, when you look at the Eastern DRC, it is a story that is actually playing within that particular context. And therefore, we are seeing within the same context, countries that are mining sort of undertaking what we can actually describe resource rush. You take a country like Zambia, sorry, I'm naming countries, and what you can actually see is the amount of copper that has actually been mined in the last 2 years or so is the same quantity that was actually mined in Zambia for over 20 years. So the last few years, there is actually a rush around the exploitation of resources for this particular transition. The value, again, still remains peppercorn, because, again, the overarching framework, which was actually the African mining vision, which had cardinal pillars to protect the environment, the cardinal pillars to strengthen the social well-being of people, cardinal pillars to strengthen the beneficiation processes across the value chain, and the cardinal pillars that, again, were essential in terms of strengthening the governance of the sector, and have not been implemented. So these issues continue then to play within our own context in this particular case. So Africa is sort of in a situation where it's trying to catch up with the rest of the world. The world is moving fast in terms of exploiting these resources, but then Africa is asking, what do we need to do to catch up? What do we need first and foremost to secure our own transition, which we are being forced to do anyway, because, again, we have nothing to transit in terms of, to sequestrate in terms of carbon. The 4% is still too low, but we are still being pushed in that particular direction. But we've not secured our own resources, but they are being exploited at a rate and a pace that is threatening. Now, this slide was spoken of by the earlier moderator. 30%, of course, of the global mineral reserves that are essential for powering the transition being in Africa, and Africa being the home of about 30% of world lithium. And again, contrast that, Zimbabwe, which has around million tons of lithium reserves, and Bolivia has around 21 tons, you can actually see Bolivia is supplying less to the global supply chain, yet Zimbabwe is doing more. The contradiction around it is Bolivia probably has moved into do much more value addition within the value chain as we are exporting to the global value chain raw, which is a critical issue. And DRC again has 7% of the world cobalt, which is extremely important, and then Zambia again 10% of the world copper reserves, which is something. But the critical issue around that we are trying to canvass then pushes us to look at how do we as Africa avoid the resource curse? Because when it comes to minerals, we always say it's a resource curse. It leaves communities impoverished. It leaves us with damages that we've got to repair. Indeed, I was in Mpumalanga and I was actually speaking to one government, the government of Mpumalanga province. They opened a mine and they are still struggling, a coal mine. They are still struggling with the cost of closing that coal mine, decommissioning it, because the cost of decommissioning by far exceeds what they managed to get out of that particular process. So these are critical issues that we must live with. Now, this then opens the bigger question, because I was taught to talk about responsible mining in Africa. Is it a mirage? I think if we look at it and without a strong policy framework, without strengthening the legal infrastructure, it still remains a mirage. But again, the complexity of actors within the mining sector in Africa is complex. We have multinational corporations, we've got the public-private partnerships in extractions, we have national entities, and we also have small-scale and artisanal miners. That's the complexity around it. Each of these has varied level of responsibility depending on policy direction, policy facilitation, and support that these entities are receiving from government. But nevertheless, it's important to point out that multinational corporations, again in terms of, and in the spirit of responsible mining, have also compromised national level policies. And indeed, you walk to some certain countries and you find multinational corporations owning pieces of land, not owning the minerals. Now they own pieces of land in posterity and owning the wealth beneath, and dispossessing communities from even the land and the interaction with the land, which are all critical issues that we must introspect and bring to fore in this particular conversation. I think if we want, I'm actually winding. So if we are looking at then the mining being responsible, then we must look at the law, the policy, the framework, and the vulnerabilities of the state institutions and democratic ideals, and how we deal with the question of patronage. We must again look at how do we vest control of cadasters for mining to local communities, which is very important, and we must look at how we strengthen our role and our engagement within the value chain, which is important. And we need to ensure that mining does not leave us with debts to pay into the future. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kalonzo. Just to let you know that we will share online the presentation so that you have time to delve into them. We're going to move very quickly to the last presenter who's going to come virtually, all the way from New Haven, Yale University, Professor Thomas Poge, who is going to speak to technology transfer dimensions and other critical issues to make this work, this transition work. You have the floor, Thomas.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon.
And thank you for inviting me. I will talk about a slightly different aspect of the green transition that you have all been discussing. And there are further asymmetries to the ones you're mentioning, right? Africa is contributing a large part of the minerals, as we heard, but Africa and the rest of the global south is also suffering a large part of the harm from emissions. And that harm includes not only global warming, which we are well aware of, but also air pollution, which is a fantastically large problem, much under-researched and under-recognized. We have, even today, roughly 8 million deaths annually from air pollution, and they're heavily concentrated in the global south. You can see here a day in Delhi, capital of India, where the air is hazardous and very unhealthy, and children in particular bear the scars of air pollution for the rest of their lives. All the dirt lodged into their lungs, it will never go away. Now, all these emissions, of course, are very heavily produced in the global north by the richer parts of humanity. The top 10% of the human population in terms of income and wealth produce 49% of all emissions, both those that are responsible for air pollution and those that produce global warming. Now, green technologies are really a very big part of the solution. You talked about the minerals that are needed for these technologies, but of course, the other big aspect is we need to know what these technologies are. We need to invent them and develop them, and rapidly and then widely deploy them. It's not just good enough to invent them, we also need to deploy them all over the world. And that is the problem I want to talk about. Now, innovators and inventors deliver thousands of green technologies every year. About 15,000 are patented in the United States alone annually. And these are important technologies that can make a real dent in emissions. But the problem is that the reward for inventing such technologies is a patent. And of course, a patent entitles the innovator to monopolize the invention and then to charge high markups. So patents are under the TRIPS agreement last 20 years. So for the next 20 years after patenting, the innovator can charge a high price, either by marking up the product by producing it itself, or by demanding royalties or licensing fees from others for the use of these innovations. Now, that greatly impedes the diffusion of innovation. It provides a nice incentive for people to innovate, but it also stops these innovations from spreading, from being widely used. This headwind against dissemination is especially harmful in regard to green technologies, because there it's not so much the buyers and users of green technologies that benefit, but third parties benefit much more. If I decide to buy an electric car, for example, that will give me a small benefit in terms of the air that I breathe, but that benefit is vanishingly small compared to the larger benefit to all human beings, all living beings on the planet, including also future generations. And so very often when making such purchasing decisions, people say, the benefit for me is just too small. I cannot afford to pay extra for using a green technology that in the end will provide 99.999% of its benefit to other people. Now, in the global north, this tendency not to pay for the monopoly markup on green technologies is counterbalanced by environmental regulations, by taxes on emissions, and by green subsidies, which encourage the choice of patented green technologies, even when they are more expensive. But in the global south, these compensatory measures are rare because they would cause substantial cash outflows to northern patentees. The north, because of its head start in capital, both human capital and financial capital, is really reaching the innovation frontier first in many crucial technologies. They are the ones who get most of the patents, And they're then turning around to the global south and saying, if you want to use our technologies, then you have to pay us for the privilege. You have to pay us markups, royalties, licensing fees for permission to use green technologies. Green technologies are more expensive than traditional dirty technologies. And the South, of course, is not particularly eager to do that, especially in light of the fact that the North has got us into the mess of the global climate and air pollution crisis. So the South is not really willing to pay these patent fees. And that means that in the global South, often green technologies are used to a much lesser extent, with the result that air pollution is rampant and the problems of climate change proliferate. Here's just one example about coal-fired power plants. There are different ways of building coal-fired power plants, and the most cutting-edge way was owned through a patent by Matsui Babcock. They had this ultra supercritical technology for which they charged $1.5 million in licensing fees for each 600 megawatt boiler. Some countries, in particular power plant operators in the global north, also in China, they were willing to pay this patent fee. But many operators in the global south said that we just don't have that kind of money. We cannot afford to use this newest, cleanest technology for producing coal-fired power. And so they stuck to the older, dirtier technologies, which generate up to 30% more emissions for decades. The typical lifetime of such a power plant is 40 years. And so if you now buy a coal-fired power plant on the old technology, for 40 years, you will produce that extra 30% of emissions. What's the solution here? The solution, I think, the general solution is creation of an ecological impact fund. This ecological impact fund would give green innovators the option to agree to the cost-free use of their innovations in exchange for payments from the Global Ecological Impact Fund, payments that are based on the measured total ecological impact of their innovations assessed according to a pre-announced metric. Basically, you get paid not simply a monopoly markup or a royalty or a licensing fee, but instead of that, you get paid money according to how much emissions your innovation keeps out of the atmosphere. This ecological impact fund is meant to accelerate the deployment of green innovations in the global south. It would invite patentees to register any new green technology with two effects in all countries below a certain per capita income, let's say $10,000 per person per year. The originator, the inventor, grants permanent royalty-free licenses in the EIF zone, which is the zone of poorer countries below 10,000, for its registered technology. So anybody can use it for free without paying any money to the innovator. But the Ecological Impact Fund then rewards each registered technology for 6 years according to the emissions averted with it in the EIF zone in the global south. Now, these EIF rewards should be financed by the states of the global north, including China, because these states can afford it. They have greatly contributed to the ecological crisis, and they have long-standing unfulfilled promises, including the 1970 promise to give 0.7% of gross national income for development assistance, the 2009 Copenhagen promise to give 100 billion annually for mitigation and adaptation, and also the big promise of the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. which have gone, as you know, backward since they were announced in 2015. Now, ecological impact fund rewards are paid through fixed annual disbursements, initially maybe 2 to 3 billion annually, with possible subsequent scale up. Any new green technology could be registered for participation in those 6 consecutive disbursements, and each disbursement would be split among registered innovations according to emissions averted with each in the EIF zone in the preceding year. After having been rewarded for 6 years, the technology would become available for free generic production and use all over the global south. The EIF reward rate, that is the rate in dollars per ton of CO2 equivalent averted, emerges endogenously. It's fixed endogenously because EIF registration is voluntary. Any innovator has the option to register or not to register, to make this trade or not to make this trade. When originators in general find the rate of reward unattractive, then registrations dry up and the reward rate rises as older innovations exit at the end of their reward period. When the reward rate is seen as generous, registrations proliferate and the reward rate declines. So it's a self-adjusting system where the reward rate is guaranteed to be satisfactory for innovators. And it will also be stable because whenever it rises too much, it gets depressed. Whenever it falls too much, it gets elevated through new registrations. So what this is essentially is an artificial new market. On this market, any new innovation, any new green innovation can compete in the quest to achieve the most cost-effective emission reductions. We aim here for the lowest hanging fruits, and innovations that would be registered would be especially those that can get the most bang for the buck, that can most efficiently achieve emission reductions. Registered technologies would be rewarded based on their performance. And here it's not just how good the innovation is, but also how widely it spreads, how many copies of it, if you like, are used in the global south. Now, notice how that completely changes the motivation of innovators. Currently, innovators are a little bit like jealous husbands. They are constantly looking, is anybody using my innovation without my permission? But with impact rewards, the motivation of innovators would be the opposite. Please use my innovation. I don't charge anything for it. I will help you install it. I will help you use it to optimal effect, because the more people use my innovation, the more money I earn through the impact rewards that I get from the Ecological Impact Fund. So innovators would be happy to provide technical assistance. They would be happy even to subsidize the cost of the innovation, because they get not only the sales price, but they also get the premium that is conditioned on the ecological impact of the use of their innovation. Now, why do we want the system only for the poorer countries, only for the countries below $10,000 per capita income? The problem there is that in poor countries, green innovations are heavily underutilized because they are too expensive for people to use. Limiting the EIF to those countries ensures that there are low opportunity costs for EIF registration. So innovators will be happy to give away their patent rights in the global south. They will not be happy to give them away in the global north. This means the EIF reward rate will be low. It doesn't take much to get innovators to give away their monopoly privileges in the south. and hence there will be very high cost effectiveness of the EIF. For relatively little money, we can get enormous ecological impact by inducing innovators to register their innovations with the EIF. Now, especially for technologies geared to poor populations in tropical regions, impact funds would also open whole new areas of technology. They would accelerate the overall pace of innovation, and they would expand capacities in the global south to develop, manufacture, distribute, deploy, operate, and maintain relevant technologies. The EIF would be optional for innovators as it is for funders. It would be a complementary alternative to monopoly rewards designed to mitigate their main moral defects and inefficiencies. This would make it much easier to establish the EIF in a gradual way. Last slide, the EIF, I think, is politically feasible. For populations in the EIF zone, it would be an obvious win because they would get access to green technologies at much lower prices. For potential customers, it's a win. They would get access to new, cheaper ways to grow green. For social justice movements and ecological movements, they would obviously be in favor of it because of the ecological impact. Innovators would love it because they have another opportunity to make money, and the whole system is optional. You can use it if you wish, but you can also stay on the monopoly patent track if that is your preference. For defenders of intellectual property rights, they would be okay with it because it's optional. They have the opportunity to register their innovations with the EIF, but they don't have to do it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm sorry that I have to cut you off.
Yeah, I'm at the end anyway, so.
Oh, thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much. And would you like to say the last word, please?
No, it's fine.
It's fine, yeah? Yeah. Thank you very much, Thomas. And I think you touched on a very important topic that we need the technology, we need the knowledge, but we need to deploy it, and we have to look for alternative ways of incentivizing that knowledge to not only be produced in Africa, but if it is produced elsewhere, that it is fast deployed so that we can make this more just and more responsible. Yeah, we started a little bit late and we've gone a little bit over time. We would just like to thank the presenters, those who are here in person, and Thomas, who came virtually, for throwing very bright light on the topic and reminding us that while we are talking about transitioning to smart energy, there are impacts that we need to pay attention to where these minerals are coming from, whether it's in Africa or anywhere in the global south. This is a conversation that we can take forward, and thank you very much for all of you for participating, those who are here in person and those who are here virtually. Once again, our speaker, thank you very much. God bless you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the Jesuit Justice and Ecology Network in Africa. That was very informative. Thank you very much. And now we move to our last session for the day.